Please, wait till the riot. Nobody wants you
Back on my patio. It's a Friday night for me. And tonight we're going to talk about chapter 47 called Rising of the Lights. It's the last track for volume 5. And excuse me if I, hack up my lungs. It really isn't that bad. I've had a little bit of a cold the last 3 days or so. Either that or it's just my chronic allergies. Either way, maybe both. It's not a bad cold or anything, but definitely need to do something to kill off whatever it is. And so I've double fisted it before. Well, tonight we're triple fisting it. Starting out with, it's more like a half shot of watermelon moonshine straight from North Carolina mountains. It's the real stuff, but it's not white lightning or anything like that. It's watermelon and bottoms up. And second, dragon's milk once again. Found some more on sale at my local grocery store. And then the third one we've got is I go to Lowe's Foods near my home, and this is one of their beer den. I haven't tried this before. It's a Kolsch style beer, which that's like a light German style. So let's try it. It's okay. Prefer Hefeweizens and stuff like that instead, but yeah, you're probably thinking I'm an alcoholic right now, and I'm not, trust me. Rising of the Lights deserves 3 drinks because it's the heaviest song I've ever written, and that goes for multiple ways. Lyrically, it's the heaviest, and also musically the heaviest, quite literally. The music for this song is a funny thing because, in a sense, it's the very last song that I wrote, but in another sense, it's tied with the first song that I wrote for this album. When I started working on these songs back at the height of the pandemic, the initial kind of doing a couple of riffs at, the very beginning, I had this idea, which, I kind of stole from Radiohead, their song from, I can't remember if it's Kid A or Amnesiac. I'm pretty sure it's from Kid A. It's called Light Spinning Plates. From what I know of the song, they came up with this keyboard line, and they thought that it was just kind of boring. You can go on YouTube and hear it backwards, and what they ended up doing with this song was I don't know if it was intentional or if it was by accident, but they literally, I guess, flipped the tape backwards, and so the entire keyboard line is played backwards, and apparently they thought that was cool. I think the song's amazing. they added some, more instrumentation to it after that to kind of fill in some things. But I think even the vocals were recorded with him singing it backwards and then flipped around so that like the vocal take was flipped back around so that it has it's supposed to sound like it's being sung forward, but because of that, like the vocals are just sound odd in some places, like phonetically. But that's what makes it interesting and cool. And my idea, I wasn't going to go that crazy with it, but what I wanted to do was to end the album. I wanted to take the actual, guitar tracks all the way from track 1, The Marriage of Elm Eugene, time stretch it. I think it ended up being like 7 or 8 times the original length. So I time stretched, those guitar parts that were originally, a minute and a half to being right at 8 minutes or so. And then flip the files around so that the entire thing's being played backwards with this, clean ambient guitar line, and then write an entirely new song based on, the chordal and key changes of the original song. So, needless to say, it was a little bit of a challenge. There were parts of it that really kind of made me want to pull my hair out, but it was one of those things that the inspiration came, would have to, maybe start out with a guitar line and then sort of hit a wall where I was like, well, I'm not sure what to do. So then I'd switch over and, a day later or whatever, just write drum parts and, get to the place where I was at, guitar wise, and then continue forward, doing some weird blast beats or breakdowns, whatever, another minute or so of drums, and then come up with, guitar lines from there, and just continually sort of move slowly forward with the song. Meanwhile, with the thought in mind that, it kind of starts with a slightly higher registry, but just gets heavy pretty damn quick. And the whole thing was designed that way. For, I would say, 10 years or so now, I've wanted, I guess, a true, it's not even a baritone guitar, it's actually lower than that, I suppose. I've always wanted to get a guitar in a drop D tuning, but an octave down. So call it a drop D tuning, which technically the low strings at that point are same kind of tuning as a bass. But it's something I've wanted for years. Used to have a 7-string. I tried it on there one time, and it just didn't sound right to me. But I had one of my main guitars worked on back in December, January, had it set, and just got a couple of sets of strings and messed around with it, trying to find exact strings that the guitar would take, because with it being a Floyd Rose guitar, there's just there is only, I think I got it to like 65, maybe 70 gauge, if I remember correctly, and it worked well enough. I wanted something a little heavier, but it was just kind of pushing what the guitar was willing to take, and I was okay with that. Widened the, I did a couple of things myself to make sure that it would take, but it worked. And so this is the first song I've ever written with that particular tuning, and I'm pretty much going to use it from now on. Part of me wishes I could go a little lower than that, but I think it's towards a threshold where it's kind of pointless to go any lower than a D note. I ended up, because of that, I use a 6-string bass, and it's tuned in like a drop tuning, just like a guitar, which I'm sure some of my bass friends watching this might shake their heads to that, but just being primarily a guitarist, it makes things a little easier for me, and means also that I can get lower registries, just being tuned lower. And I literally tuned that to a drop D tuning, but I guess that would be like 2 octaves down. I had to special order strings to make that happen. I bought literally the highest gauge string that anybody makes, period. It's 175 gauge string, and if you buy your typical 6-string guitar bass strings, say at Guitar Center, the highest they usually go is 125 to 130 gauge, so that hopefully gives you an idea of, they're very thick strings, and with it being a D, it's pushing what the human ear can actually discern. I mean, it's low, and I hit like in the open D a couple of times in the song in that bass, and it's a rumble. And once again, I know some of my bass playing friends probably shake their head to that, but I love it. I love when it gets that low and that heavy. It's that 175 gauge string is meant to be in F sharp, but I guess that's like 3 half steps or something down from there in D, so it's heavy. Let's see what else. Yeah, based on my notes here, having the first song, time stretched and played backwards, I had to kind of figure out um, from the very beginning the metronome track to base everything off of time wise. And I mean, that was itself kind of a chore. A lot of just trial and error to get something that initially sounded like it would fit with the track, and then having to figure out, before I even turned the original, like, clean guitars backwards, finding where there were, like, transitions for the chords so that I could base everything off of those, like, chordal transitions, flip it backwards, and everything be in the right place where they're supposed to be for those transitions, and then kind of compartmentalize the spaces between that, find, okay, how many beats are going between this one long drawn out chordal section. Okay, if it's 40 total beats, then that's how long this particular riff or section has to be, and just trying to have the riffs end as close to those sections as possible, because at that point it almost becomes, at least in some sections of the song, I guess, because it's a different chord altogether. It's like almost like changing keys. And the riffs that I was writing, the breakdowns that I was writing, were based solely on that. I mean, it was complicated writing this song, and it took longer than any other song on this album, but for that too, it's being just the heaviest, and just everything about this song. It's probably my second favorite song that I've written on this album, and definitely way, way up there compared to everything else I've ever written. I love this song. It's just heavy in all the ways that I needed it to be heavy. Being pretty much an 8-minute song, the last minute and a half, once I got to that point where, like, one of the things that I wanted to do in this song, and this is coming from also listening to a lot of Silent Planet and their influence on me, is having a few different sections where drums and everything kind of drop out, and just having the backwards guitar track playing, and that's musically all you hear, and just like screaming over top of that, and then just coming back with some heavy chug or whatever. That was something that I really wanted to do, because the way Silent Planet does that sort of thing, I think, is very inspiring. And then also, there's like one section where the guitars drop out, but it's just like bass and drums, coming up with this melody, like a vocal melody where I'm just singing, like I loved how that turned out. Just musically, I wanted this song to be as special as it is lyrically. So, with that being said, let's get into the literal meaning of the song. Now, the speakers within it, it's just down to 3 different speakers. It's the protagonist in the Black Knight, and then Lady Elm as well. Because at the end of the last song, everybody else they're doing their thing. They've like I said from yesterday's post on this chapter, the community, the commune is schismed, and the tribe is no more. And so everybody else, they're not together per se, but they all have the same value of being okay with violence. Whereas these 3 characters of the protagonist, Black Knight and Lady Elm, reject that notion. So I would say maybe a couple of hours or so have passed since Lady Elm's lament at the end of the last song. They've come to realize that Auteur and Master Bates are outside of the prison. They're rioting on the streets, inciting violence and whatnot. So obviously there has to be a way out of the prison. Really, for the first time since the protagonist has been there, he realizes that there is a viable way to get out of the prison. The problem is they don't know how, so they just go searching around. Now, Lady Elm has gone off by herself because of the lament, the heartbreak from her marriage basically being ended at the end of the last song. She's gone off by herself, but she's also keeping in mind that, she's looking for a way out of the prison. And I think it isn't explicitly said, but having loyalty with each other, they've all realized that if they find a way out, they will eventually find each other so that they can go together. But in the meantime, the Black Knight and the protagonist are sticking together, and they're searching for a way out. And they come across a room. And this isn't like a new room or anything like that within the prison. It's along the perimeter of one of the sides of the prison. But they find that there's a hole in its barrier and window, that somebody's basically blown up a hole in this room. The implication is that this was done by Master Bates back in, what is the name of that song? Just Desserts. Because in that song, there's reference to that sort of thing. So the implication is, the assumption is that Master Bates blew up a hole in this wall and window and everything. Hence, like the cover for the album and the protagonist in Black Knight walk through, and for the first time since the very beginning of Volume 2, the protagonist and Black Knight are standing out on the city street as free men outside the prison. They are thinking about Lady Elm and everything, but they're just kind of shocked by what they see because the streets are empty. They start walking around kind of in the streets and the sidewalk in the immediate vicinity of this hole in the wall, and they find the meat market from Volume 3 across the street. It's completely emptied, and the protagonist sees that the meat market is in complete disrepair and has been abandoned. It's empty, but there are still blood stains dried up, on the streets in front of it. And this could be from, the animals slaughtered there, but also it's from the rioting in culture war. That it's both human and animal blood just staining the streets and dried up. But then through the very window that the protagonist watched the meat market back in Volume 3, and I guess some of the events from Volume 4, he sees the window because he starts hearing a light tapping or beating on, coming from somewhere in a light plea for help, which might be kind of a miracle within itself, because in Volume 3 he would, he beat on the window and everything, and nothing, like nobody outside heard anything or paid attention. But he and the Black Knight discern this, and they approach the window and can barely make out, sort of peering inside, that Lady Elm is on the other side of this window crying for help because she's collapsed and has blood coming out from her mouth. She's dying. So the protagonist is beating on the window and trying to get through, but it ends up being the Black Knight who is the one who's strong enough to shatter the glass with his fist, and in doing so, they jump onto the other side, back into the prison technically, and they hold her as she dies. Most of the song, probably half the song, is their experience of her dying. And so at the very end of the song, they carry her outside after she's dead so that she too can be free. And as they walk away, carrying her body, the prison bursts into flame, and it's on fire, just as a lot of the city behind them is also on fire and burning. And that's where it ends. This is a hard song to talk about. I just want to say that. the fruit of the Spirit, unlike all the other songs, isn't exactly applicable here because there are, 9 of those listed, I guess, in Galatians, and this is the 10th song. Technically, there is not an amoral step for this song either. What that ends up being instead is that instead of being a amoral step, the step that they take that actually gains their freedom, unlike everybody else, is that they have a moral rejection of every amoral step that's come up to this point. So in this case, they actually become moral with specifically the willingness towards long suffering. So personally, the meaning, the personal meaning is when I always designed it. I knew it was going to end. This volume was going to end with Lady Elm's death. I've known that for a couple of years now, I guess. I wanted to write this song with my mentor, her death in mind, but it really, once I sat down and wrote this song, it wasn't about that at all. When I was a little kid, one of my greatest fears in life was, and I remember telling friends at elementary school this maybe once, that I couldn't imagine watching somebody die. I couldn't imagine being in a place where somebody dies in your arms. I couldn't imagine having to live with myself, or yourself or whatever after that happens. I couldn't fathom that at 9 or 10 years old. We had to put down my childhood dog when I was a senior in high school. That was tough. Then, I don't know how many years, it's been 9 or 10 years, 9 years maybe. My Nana's, she used to have this little pug that just adored me, and it got really old and really sick, and at the very end, my Nana called and she was afraid that the dog was dying. So I rushed to the house and the dog, I ran inside and her dog was underneath, the TV stand in and it was almost like the dog was waiting for me or something. I literally cradled her in my arms and she just died right there on me. And I've talked about, era of practical nihilism and all in the past. And that was one of those moments when I realized something was wrong in my life. It took a while, took years for that stuff to work itself out, I guess, but that dog literally dying in my arms just hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and I knew that like something was wrong in my life. Maybe like a year after that, my nana's twin sister passed away, and a bunch of us were gathered in her room in the hospital. She had C. diff at that point, and we all had to have like the special attire and stuff on, and none of us even really thought about it. Like, yeah, we were, I guess, wearing masks or whatever, but we didn't really think about like if we got infected with it or whatever. It was just like everybody had the choice to be in there. And nobody thought twice about it because, literally this is about life or death. And I walked out of that room with my Nana because, that was her twin sister after she passed away. And we're both, crying or whatever. And all I could think about was, the woman I wanted to marry. And like messaging her, because it was just like one of those moments of, who's going to be there when I die? I hope it would be her, his future wife kind of thing. I just wanted to reach out to her because, it was like literally like 5 minutes after she breathed her last breath, I think about that sort of stuff, but this song really is about none of that. It's really to set up the idea that as a kid, I feared the idea of watching somebody pass away right in front of me. And then 2 years ago, my Nana passed away. This song is about my Nana. A month and a half or so before this happened, I went down and spent the better part of an entire week on vacation with my Nana down at Carolina Beach, where she and my aunt were living at the time. And had a good time. Spent, quite a bit of time with my Nana and all. She was 81, 82, somewhere in there. And, she almost died like 10 years ago. She was pretty much dead for like 24 minutes. Had, strokes and stuff like that. And, so she stayed at her house a lot. But got to spend, a week with her. And, that was really cool, and knew that, she's getting old and, her body was frail and all, but I didn't really think of it as being like the last time I would see her, But then late September, I guess it was this exact time, 2 years ago, she contracted COVID. So I have to point out the fact that I talked to her on the phone, I guess a few days after she realized that she had COVID, and you could tell she was sick and everything, but like she didn't sound bad off. She sounded like she was doing okay. So then, a few days after that, she was in their like laundry room getting some laundry out, and I guess the best guess is that her dog was behind her or something, sniffing around, and she didn't realize it and tripped and fell. And she basically shattered her hip. So my aunt found her, within pretty quick, I guess. Took her to the hospital and everything, and she, I'm sure she was also like in congestive heart failure and had been for at least like 6 months or something like that, which I didn't really realize that she was already like in, like I knew her heart was not great, but I didn't realize it was to the degree of like congestive heart failure. You can be in, I mean, that really just to me means, your heart is a ticking time bomb at that point. So she was taken to the hospital, but because she had COVID already and had COVID for like a week or a week and a half or something, by that point, she was put in like quarantine right away. And I guess those three things, the hip being basically shattered, COVID, and then congestive heart failure is just too much for, 81, 82-year-old body to handle. The problem was, because of like COVID protocols and everything, she was in complete isolation. It was the most fucked up, inhumane thing. If she had died 2 weeks later, they would have let every single one of us be there. But like one Friday, after she had been there for about 2 weeks, I got, like, my mom basically, she went down there pretty much right away, and she and my dad called, and they told me a couple of days ahead of time, like, we think it's coming close to time. Got the call Friday morning, and that time was drawing near, and like my brother and I both, we left. We went down there immediately, no second thought about it. I'm gonna stop this for right now because I know it's getting pretty long, and we'll do a second part of it tomorrow. So we'll continue this discussion.
When they clearly